finished up your session with the library, where Melissa Hong really helpfully walked us through what media literacy is, why it's important when it comes to some of the headlines that you see on social media and in the news, what's real, what's not. And in order to kind of make a connection here, and really, I guess, emphasize the importance of media literacy, which I think that Lisa Cutter is going to do, I guess, much better than I will. I wanted to give you a passage from Thomas S. Kuhn's book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. If you've ever heard the term paradigm shift, he's the one who coined that. But he makes an observation about the way that we're far more susceptible for letting our assumptions shape the way that we take an experience and process it. Far much more than we are able to allow experiences and evidence to shape our assumptions. I see this at work in the way that we look at media literacy too. Our assumptions very often give us some sense of what we just believe inherently to be real or not, whether that headline is true or fake. So I want to give you a kind of anecdote in Kuhn's book, where he talks about a playing card experiment that psychologists used. It was conducted by two scientists named Bruner and Postman, and they asked their subjects to identify on short and controlled exposure a series of playing cards. This is from a regular deck. Many of the cards were normal, but some were made anomalous, such as a red six of spades or a black four of hearts. Each experimental run was constituted by a display of a single card to the subject, and usually without any hint that anything was awry, people could look at those anomalous cards that shouldn't exist and put them into the pre-classified categorizations. For example, they might look at the red six of spades, and they might call it a red six of hearts. So usually when people would see enough of these anomalous cards, they'd start to catch on and hesitate. And most of them by the end would be able to classify those anomalous cards correctly. But some people, and this is what I think is really interesting, were never able to make the requisite adjustment for their categories. And the subjects who then failed often experienced acute personal distress. One of them exclaimed, "I can't make the suit out, whatever it is. It didn't even look like a card at that time. I don't know what color it is now or whether it's a spade or a heart. I'm not even sure now what a spade looks like. My God!" Sort of like total discrimination. So, with that said, I think that it is appropriate in terms of an example of the way that we show up to the information that we see, what kinds of expectations we bring to the table. So I'm really proud and excited to introduce Representative Lisa Cutter to you tonight. She is a civil servant. She's our House District Representative in Colorado for Jefferson County, House District 25. And she has spent 25 years in PR. Her company is Cutter Communications, and she does this as well. She came alongside being representative. She believes fiercely in authenticity and integrity in PR and life. And don't even get her started on fake news. She is crazy about peanut butter and chocolate, friends, hiking, reading, and her 3 outstanding kids and husband. She has also held national and local roles with the Public Relations Society of America. So I hope you will help me in giving Representative Cutter a warm welcome for her talk tonight.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be here tonight and talking to you about this work that I really love. And thanks for the great introduction, Liz. We're here to discuss, as you know, media literacy. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the good work of the Gunnison School District and Superintendent Nichols. I understand that media literacy really is part of, integrated in all the classes, and the teachers have a variety of approaches in supporting that. So it's great to see school districts and universities like you guys adopting media literacy practices. And we hope to do more, obviously, with my media literacy bill. Did I lose sound? Yeah. Oops. Okay. All right. So this is okay. Hopefully the sound will work on this slide.
Hello. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about a new technology that's affecting famous people. Remember when Obama called Trump a dipshit? Or the time Kim Kardashian rapped?
Because I'm always happy. Thank you.
Or when Arnold Schwarzenegger impersonated himself? Deepfake.
Gotta be kidding.
This is a deepfake too. I'm not Adele, but I am an expert in online manipulation. So deepfakes is a term that's used to describe video or audio files that have been created using artificial intelligence.
My favorite is probably Lisa Vanderpump.
It started as a very basic face swapping technology, and now it's turned into a film-level CGI. There's been this huge explosion, like, oh my goodness, we can't trust anything. Yes, deepfakes are eerily dystopian, and they're only going to get more realistic and cheaper to make. But the panic around them is overblown. In fact, the alarmist hype is possibly more dangerous than the technology itself. Let me break this down. First, what everyone is freaking out about is actually not new. It's a much older phenomenon that I like to call the weaponization of context, or shallow fakes, with Photoshop and video editing software. There's so many needs. How about the time Nancy Pelosi appeared to be drunk while giving a speech?
But you never know with this president of the United States.
Turns out that video was just slowed down at 75%. It was
Very strange.
You can have a really simplistic piece of misleading content that can do huge damage. For example, in the lead up to the midterms, we saw lots of imagery around this caravan of people who were moving towards the US. This photo was shared with captions demonizing the so-called migrant caravan at the US-Mexico border in 2018. But a reverse image search showed it was actually Pakistani refugees in Greece. You don't need deep fakes, AI technology to manipulate emotions or to spread misinformation. This brings me to my second point. What we should be really worried about is the liar's dividend. The lies and actions people will get away with by exploiting widespread skepticism to their own advantage. So remember the Access Hollywood tape that emerged a few weeks before the 2016 election?
And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Around that time, Trump apologized, but then more recently, he's actually said, oh, I'm not sure if I actually said that. When anything can be fake, it becomes much easier for the guilty to dismiss the truth as fake. What really keeps me awake at night is less the technology, it's how we as a society respond to the idea that we can't trust what we see or what we hear. So if we are fear-mongering, if we are hyperbolic, if we are waving our hands in the air, that itself can be part of the problem. You can see where this road leads. As public trust in institutions like the media, education, and elections dwindles, then democracy itself becomes unsustainable. The way that we respond to this serious issue is critical. Partly this is the platforms thinking very seriously about what they do with this type of content, how they label this kind of content. Partly it's the public recognizing their own responsibility. And if you don't know 100% hand on heart this is true, please don't share, because it's not worth the risk.
So the point of that is, if you don't know that it's 100% that it's true, please don't share. That's why I believe that media literacy is important, and that's why I sponsored a bill on media literacy education. Media literacy has always been important to me as a public relations practitioner. But I realized how important it was when I had a Facebook argument with my sister-in-law. Anybody ever have a Facebook argument? This was about 3 years ago when there's a lot of misinformation flying around, and I was on a mission. I was going to fix it. And she posted something about Obama being a Muslim and not having a birth certificate. Oh, there it goes. Oh, there it is. And not having a birth certificate and just a bunch of stuff that was easily debunked in about 30 seconds. And let me be clear, I don't care if what her opinion on was about President Obama, but there's plenty reasons for us not to like someone or to disagree with someone. Let's stick to the reality. Let's not make things worse by sharing misinformation. So I very, very kindly and tactfully pointed this out to her, and let's just say that she doesn't come to Thanksgiving anymore. So while that's an unfortunate story, How many of you love storytelling in general? How many of you love stories? How many of you love acquiring knowledge? Now, I would assume there would be a lot more hands up now. Come on, that's why we're here, right? I, as a public relations person and a legislator, that's what I love too. I love to learn about a lot of things, a lot of new things. It's what I love most about my job. And I grew up reading the Rocky Mountain News and the Denver Post, yes, on actual paper, on newsprint, and with the purpose of taking in all of the information that I could. I wanted to be a reporter, and I wrote for my high school and college papers and also a community paper. I wanted to be that person to ask questions and create the stories that people would want to, the compelling stories that people would want to read. My life went in a different direction, but my love of journalism did not. I became a public relations practitioner and worked closely with media throughout my career, specializing in media relations and training. What I learned is that journalists are people. Are there any journalists in the room? Can you confirm that you are indeed people? I'm pretty sure of it. Like all people, they have opinions, right? Everyone has opinions. And of course, there are bad actors in any profession. That's across the board. But good journalists, and I really think most of them are, take very seriously their professional and ethical responsibility to provide factual and unbiased reporting. I've noticed throughout my career, and especially over the last several years, that 3 significant trends have emerged. The first is that the number of credible media outlets has diminished significantly. The second is that political leaders are claiming there is such a thing as fake news in order to diminish trust, doing our country a significant disservice and essentially mounting an assault on the First Amendment. The third is the proliferation of intentional misinformation campaigns, which are most often politically motivated. And here we come to the first stop on a very solemn journey, the disappearance of traditional media. The Rocky Mountain News was launched in 1859, and 150 years later, I marched with hundreds of people in the candlelight vigil to mourn its loss. We were doing this because we all understood the impact of losing an important voice in the community. Denver is not an anomaly. There are now over 1,300 communities in the United States that have completely lost local news coverage. That means school board, city council, all these important things, holding local officials accountable. That's what local news does, and it's gone. There are several reasons for this trend. One is dwindling ad revenue as we increasingly read our news online. And there are plenty of arguments that the media didn't adapt its model quickly enough to a changing landscape. But they, and we, are certainly paying for it now. There's also the idea of this death spiral, a quality death spiral. So papers losing revenue make cuts in their newsroom and in the distribution. However, without making substantial investments in the quality of the published material, by investing in good reporters and editors in that, local news sources risk losing readership. So it's kind of a circular thing. As failing paper makes more cuts, the loss in quality cuts further in its loss into its readership. So newsroom investment today is down 47% from 2004. And this includes jobs like reporters going out and asking those hard questions and holding people accountable, and editors who really are a filter for that newspaper for something being true and making sure sources are accurate and the grammar is correct and all those things that make a paper good. So as you can see in this photo, the Denver Post, for example, has been decimated by its venture capitalist owner, Alden Media. Over the last several years, the newsroom has gone from 142 people, and that wasn't even its high point. That was in 2013. To fewer than 50, as you can tell by this photo illustration. The decline of print media may be more than made up for by online news sources. There's sure plenty of those, right? You can find news anywhere. But this does represent challenges in regards to how we perceive this media. In print media, news sources were largely trustworthy because they had those layers. They had editors and fact checkers working to guarantee accurate reporting. In the online space, it can be harder to differentiate reliable sources. from less reliable ones. And there is no barrier to entry in online reporting. Anyone can set up a website and write articles. There's nothing wrong with this. I believe fully in free speech and freedom of expression. But when people believe that some of these informal media outlets are as credible as a legitimate news source, that's a problem. We need to be able to understand which publications are thoroughly vetted and which are not. So this is just an example from the New York Times on their editorial policy and guidelines. So this is look how many things they have. They have all these guidebooks and guidelines on integrity and ethical journalism and guides on how to handle reader comments. And that's what makes an outlet credible, a real demonstrated commitment to ethics and process. So that's a good way to know if a news source is ethical. The next trend we see is diminishing trust in the media. Here's the results of a recent Gallup poll. So Gallup annually asks respondents, in general, how much trust do you have in the mass media, such as newspapers, TV, radio, and when it comes to reporting news fully, accurately, and fairly? A great deal, a fair amount, not very much, or none at all. So you can see here, Americans do not have a lot of trust in mass media. 13% trust the media a great deal, and 28% a fair amount. To make coherent arguments for our beliefs, we need to be able to trust the information sources on which we rely. Now, interestingly, the result of this poll hit an all-time low in 2016, suggesting that politics has a part to play in this. In the next slide here, so while trust in media hit an all-time low in 2016, that doesn't really tell the whole story. Republicans had a more precipitous drop in trust than Democrats did. Their trust in the media, as you can see here, has not recovered. Meanwhile, Democrats' level of trust in mass media has rebounded significantly. And this is likely due to efforts to discredit the media. The president has named mass media as an enemy of the United States. It should go without saying, but citizens in a democracy should be able to trust institutions which robustly edit and fact-check their reporting. Trust in a news source should not depend on party affiliation. If this continues, we may see political parties disagreeing not on matters of policy, because that's always going to happen, and that's how we govern, that's healthy, but on the objective truth. How many people feel like that might already have happened? That maybe we're not making decisions based on facts anymore. So here's an example of that, an unfortunate example of that. So NASA, which we should all agree that NASA is a credible source, right? They say that 97% of actively publishing climate scientists agree that humans are responsible for causing global warming and climate change. 97%. And yet, in this slide, you can see, in the one on the left here, the number of articles containing skeptical voices as a percentage of the total number of articles covering climate change or global warming. So look at Brazil. Less than 5% of articles about climate change had any skepticism in them. And the graph goes on up. The UK is higher, the next level, but then the US, nearly a third of articles contain skepticism about the fact of climate change. Now the next slide is the percentage of papers endorsing anthropogenic global warming, talking about the people that think that it's due to humans, to anthropogenic. So that, I think, is alarming. This has prevented us from addressing a real, this fake news, this disinterest or this misinformation and skepticism has prevented us from addressing a real existential threat that we actually have the power to mitigate through our collective action. And a different, and I believe alarming example of this is when Kellyanne Conway, who was the president's spokesperson, attempted to explain away the truth by referencing alternative facts. I don't think you could create a better oxymoron if you tried. Facts are facts. There should be no argument. One of my closest friends at the time was president of our professional organization, which Liz talked about, Public Relations Society of America. And I was on her advocacy committee, and we were alarmed at the actions of a communications professional because this person at this national level represented our profession on a national stage. So together, we crafted this statement in Jane's name. Truth is the foundation of all effective communications. By being truthful, we build and maintain trust with the media and our customers, clients, and employees. As professional communicators, we take very seriously our responsibility to communicate with honesty and accuracy. The Public Relations Society of America, the largest communications organization in the world, sets the standard of ethical behavior for our 22,000 members through our Code of Ethics. Encouraging and perpetuating the use of alternative facts by a high-profile spokesperson reflects poorly on all communications professionals. PRSA strongly objects to any effort to deliberately misrepresent information. Honest, ethical professionals never spin, mislead, or alter facts. We applaud our colleagues and professional journalists who work hard to find and report the truth. This statement really illustrates my idealism about communications. I completely believe in the power of words, and I know communications can change the world. And I assert that a functional democracy requires that we agree on that objective truth. This facilitates a dialogue about problems and solutions rather than a fight over accuracy. Information has the power to shape that dialogue. So you have more power than you might think, all of you sitting out in this audience. Being an ethical and informed communicator is a really easy way for you as citizens in a democracy to flex that power. Another clear trend is the rise of deliberate misinformation campaigns. It's very easy to fall for misinformation. I mean, seriously, who's done that? Who's fallen for something online that you really thought was true? I bet most of you have, definitely. It's really easy to do this. These campaigns are designed to spread very quickly. They want to draw you in and get you all worked up so that you need to share it immediately with your friends. There are 4 main tactics that can play into these misinformation campaigns. The first is viral sloganeering. This means packaging and pushing claims and talking points. Second is leak forgery, fabricating and leaking false documentation. Third is evidence collages, selectively bundling information together and examples from multiple sources together so it looks more credible. And the fourth, keyword squatting, using sock puppet impersonation accounts and flooding or brigading comments, keywords and hashtags to misrepresent issues, individuals, or groups. So here's a few examples of some of these tactics in practice. On August 31st, there was a shooting spree in 2 West Texas towns. When police identified the gunman the day after the shooting, a false claim quickly spread online that he was a supporter of 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke. Here we see the tactic of viral sloganeering. At one point, the false claim comprised more than 13% of all tweets about the shooter. That would be due to the tactic of keyword squatting. Impersonation accounts on Twitter can artificially create a hashtag trend. Then doctored images of the shooter's truck with an O'Rourke campaign bumper sticker emerged. We also saw screenshots of fake online profiles listing false information about the shooter's political affiliations and ethnicity. This was leak forgery. Fake evidence appeared in a way that it made it seem like a leak. These claims were then combined and spread, an evidence collage, selectively bundling information from a variety of sites to create the illusion of a legitimate story. So it's really easy to get sucked into these things when you see it in so many different places. So this is an example of a misinformation campaign that was motivated by politics. News sites such as the Associated Press have used this particular story to suggest an increased eagerness of some to baselessly blame mass shootings on particular political ideologies. And it does go both ways. It happens on both sides. This is how the wedge is hammered in. And this is how we are further divided as a society. These tactics make it difficult to determine the origins of pieces of coordinated information. Disguising the content's creators and their intent helps false claims get amplified to larger audiences by social media influencers and by news outlets debunking or otherwise covering the campaign. We need education to help society be more critical of the information they see online. Teaching and learning about misinformation tactics will equip students and citizens, all of you, with more tools to assess information online critically. Here's another one, feeding our own bias. We all love to do that. Everyone is probably guilty of this at some point. We now have the ability to curate our own news feeds. And this is done both intentionally on our behalf and by news aggregators, social media platforms, and search engines. Some of us might get stuck in a filter bubble, a term that was coined by internet activist Eli Pariser. Filter bubbles give us information or narratives that we like to see. So we just keep getting fed the same thing over and over again that reinforces our existing beliefs. So this media chart, have any of you seen these charts that kind of categorize media and opinion versus fact? And no? Well, there's a whole bunch of them online, and this is a good example of kind of gives you the idea of what leans left, what's the center. There's other ones that say, well, this is a lot of opinion, but the reporting is fact. I mean, there's some really good sources out there, and this is a pretty good one. I try to stick to the unsensationalized truth, basically in the middle of this chart in my news intake. There's certain media organizations that really are clearly aligned with my viewpoint, but I honestly try to avoid them. And if something pops up in my Facebook or Twitter feed that coincides with my acknowledged bias, I search the topic and see if it comes up in more than one unbiased, legitimate, what I would consider to be a credible media outlet. There's nothing inherently wrong with wanting your worldview affirmed. This is just human nature. However, getting stuck in this bubble can be really harmful. We don't want to believe there's only one right answer to a problem. That's never the case. There's many, many ways to look at things. We want to be educated and able to have a conversation with those who disagree with us. This allows democracy to function, and it will allow you to communicate your point of view more convincingly. With the loss of credible journalism, diminishing trust in media, and the rise of intentional campaigns to mislead us, misinformation will proliferate and continue to divide us. That's why I believe it is really critical that we all learn how to identify what's news versus what's opinion. 5 people on CNN discussing one piece of news for a half an hour, that's not news. That's people dissecting a piece of news and giving their opinion. And also what constitutes a credible media outlet, and help the next generation navigate those issues as well. So why does media literacy matter? I really believe that most people act with good intentions. Even if I disagree with them, I like to believe that they're coming from a good place. They're doing things for the right reasons or for good reasons. So when people are given trustworthy information with which to act upon, they can make the right decisions for them more often than not. Conversely, bad information, intentional and otherwise, leads to bad decisions and bad behavior. As computer programmers like to say, garbage in, garbage out. And here's another excellent example of that, what's become known as Pizzagate. So through a very weird and complex series of events, false stories and theories sprung up centering around a rumored child pornography ring. Do you guys remember this? Do you remember Pizzagate? It was awful. On December 4th, Edgar M. Welch, a 28-year-old from North Carolina, arrived at Comet with a military-style rifle and a handgun. The police said he fired the rifle inside the pizzeria, thankfully hurting no one, and surrendered after finding no evidence to support the claims of the child slaves that he thought were held in the basement. The shooting did not put the theory to rest, though. Purveyors of the theory and fake news pointed to the mainstream media as conspirators and covering up something to protect what they said was a crime ring. The image on this slide it contributed to the conspiracy theories. People attempted to link the pizza shop's branding to Satanism. So things can get carried away pretty quickly. And in another story, who remembers this one? The MAGA hats and the... This was so confusing. There were so many different reports and different things going on. There's a whole bunch of misinformation around this. It was a rally. It was originated as a rally for Native Americans and other indigenous people. Dozens of students from Covington Catholic High School in Kentucky, who had been in Washington for an anti-abortion March for Life rally, were standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And many of them were white and wearing apparel bearing the slogan of President Trump. There were also black men who identified themselves as Hebrew Israelites. They were preaching their beliefs and shouting racially combative comments at the Native Americans and the students, according to witnesses. So soon the Native American man, Nathan Phillips, the one that you see there on the right, 64 years old, was encircled by an animated group of these high school boys. He was beating a ceremonial drum. You guys have probably many of you have seen the video. And a boy wearing the red Make America Great hat stood just inches away from him, and it looked kind of threatening. It was a pretty provocative image that rocketed across social media, and leading many, including the student's own school, to condemn the boy's behavior as disrespectful. But there was way more to the story. Mr. Phillips later clarified to people that it was he who had approached the crowd, and that he had intervened because racial tensions seemed to be escalating, primarily between the white students and the black men. And he was trying to help. He was stepped in between them to pray. And in his statement, Mr. Sandman, the student, said he did not antagonize or try to block Mr. Phillips. I did not speak to him. I did not make any hand gestures or any other aggressive moves. So the encounter became a touch point for racial and political tensions in America, with diverging views about what really happened. The story is pretty convoluted. But by then, thousands of people had signed on to an online petition to remove the school's principal, while in some circles, Mr. Phillips was cast as a professional activist engaged in a publicity stunt. So these kids were vilified, this man who was trying to make peace was vilified. It was just a mess. And both of these stories illustrate, I think they're important because they illustrate that real damage happens. People are hurt. I mean, it's thankful that nobody was, it was a miracle that no one was actually killed when that guy went in and shot the pizza place. But bad things can happen, and lots of damage can happen to people, so that's why it's important to understand where things are coming from. So media literacy is more important than ever. Wide access to the internet has completely transformed how we as a society communicate, learn, act, and most importantly, react to the changing world around us. I did not have such a limitless reservoir of information to draw on when I was your age. We didn't have phones. We used card catalogs and microfiche at the library to research information. Do you guys even know what that is, microfiche? We walked uphill to school both ways. We maybe watched the nightly news occasionally or read a newspaper. But we had librarians, editors, and trusted adults as our information filters. There's really no information filters now. It's freely available at any time. Access is unfettered and unfiltered. But I do have a caveat. According to research from the Media Insight Project, who shares an article on social media, who shares an article on social media influences whether people will trust it. So presuming your friends trust you, you can have a lot of power by carefully vetting the articles you share on social media. So that's a real responsibility, and it's something that's pretty easy to do. So if chapter 1 was my PR career, now cut to chapter 2, my career as a legislator and filing my very first bill title. Campaigning, has any of you ever been around a campaign as a public official? Anybody? Political campaign? It's pretty exhausting work, but if you're interested in politics, it'd be great fun to volunteer. It's a good experience. But it can be really hard and difficult and time-consuming. So, and I had a really difficult race. So it was a long, hard race. Mostly because I'm the first Democrat and only the second woman in history to represent my district. So I had a real fight, and winning wasn't a sure thing. So while lots of people were thinking about their legislation and what they were going to do when they were in office, I was just hoping I was going to get to office. So when I got there, I only had a month. As soon as I was elected, I found out I only had a month to file my first 3 bill titles. But first, as one does when they're exhausted and strung out, I went to Mexico. And fortunately, sitting by a pool with an umbrella drink proved to be very inspirational. When I was thinking of things, I tried to think about things that mattered to me. How could I really make a difference? Media literacy came immediately to my mind. I did a little bit of online research, and I sent an email right there from the pool to the president of Media Literacy Now. Her name is Erin McNeil. It's an organization that provides a lot of materials and education on media literacy. So Aaron sent me some sample legislation from other states and pointed me in the right direction, and the journey began. This became my very first piece of legislation in the form of House Bill 110, media literacy. Though we are cautioned not to be married to our bills, I was pretty tight with this one because this was the world I'd lived in for almost 30 years. We have lots of legal and medical professionals in the House who are expert in those areas, but this was my area that I could be an expert in. In my estimation, teaching students how to separate fact from opinion and how to evaluate the accuracy of the massive information they're taking in will help plant the seeds for more informed citizenry and productive dialogue in our society. But lesson one, when working on an education bill, work with stakeholders to make sure the bill will be implemented in a way that is not burdensome to educators. I bet the educators in this room can appreciate that, I hope. It was really important to us to craft this bill in a way that is sensitive to the needs and limitations. There's lots of resource issues and time issues, so we wanted to be mindful of that. So the bill was first heard in the House Education Committee on February 5th. And we had lots of great testimony from the community, a whole bunch of journalists, someone from the Colorado Press Association. And what was really remarkable to me was we had the vice president of Associated Press, who worked out of the Denver Bureau. He came and testified, and that was really a big deal, I guess, because he had to get permission from the CEO, the top people at AP, because that's not something they typically do, is participate at all in the political process in an effort to keep those two things separate. But he simply came and testified because this was such an important issue for them. He actually said that, looking back on that deep fake video, he said those things were making their hair on fire all around the world. Like that, those were his words. They didn't know what was real and what was not, and they were really working hard to keep up with it because all content comes from somewhere, right? They don't initially, AP doesn't generate every bit of content they use. They have to have sources too. So so he testified, and it was very impactful. So at the meeting, at the hearing, my bill received a lot more opposition than I would have expected. I thought it was a pretty straightforward thing. It would create a committee to study how media literacy curriculum could be implemented in schools that would include issue experts like educators and media professionals. My Republican colleagues were concerned that the language of my bill might exclude educators who were not union members, which was, of course, not my intent. I just wanted to make sure they were credible professionals that were part of an association or something bigger than them to demonstrate their commitment to their profession. We postponed further discussion until the following Thursday so I could work to address these concerns. And the bill did pass out of committee that Thursday, but unfortunately we still had some disagreements about the committee composition. I was really adamant that we include language to ensure the professionalism of each committee member, other than students and parents, of course, who are also part of the committee. One of my colleagues suggested that it would be better to have average people without expertise in this area populating the committee. I wanted librarians, professional teachers, and media from reputable sources. He wanted farmers, waitresses, and accountants, not necessarily people who are qualified to make decisions on media education. So near to my bill's scheduled hearing in the House Appropriations Committee, Appropriations Committee is where we go to get budget to make sure that they approve the spending attached to the bill. I heard concern that it may come with a heftier price tag that I was comfortable with. And this was mostly due, originally in the bill, we had this group of stakeholders, librarians, teachers, parents, all these people coming together from across the state multiple times. We had a meeting multiple times, and that was a lot of travel cost and a lot of expense. So I worked with the drafter and other relevant stakeholders to reduce the fiscal impact. And we made some adjustments to the bill to accomplish the same objectives with a smaller fiscal note, which is the funding, what it's called. We had a number of things we wanted to accomplish in 2019 legislative session and a limited budget, so we're focused on delivering as much as we could with the resources that we had. And it really forced me to think creatively about how to implement this bill to increase the likelihood that it would pass. So that was a really good thing. It forced me to use our resources wisely. Not that we weren't trying to do that originally, but we had to really refocus on that and try to come up with some options. Oops. Oh, rats. Here. Just a minute here. So with the 2019 legislative session scheduled to adjourn on May 3rd, we had less than 1 month to get the bill passed, to get media literacy passed. It went first to the House floor on April 12th, and it passed through the third reading, the final reading through the House on April 16th. Then the next stop, the Senate, where Senator Brittany Peterson carried the bill. And then it passed the Senate Education Committee on April 25th, then the Appropriations Committee, Senate Appropriations, on April 26th. Because they had made slight adjustments to the bill, the process meant that it had to come back to the House for what we call reconciliation. So it's a really long road for these bills sometimes. With 1 week left, we just weren't under time pressure. So Colorado, unlike a lot of other states, is constitutionally obligated or obliged to keep a balanced budget. At some point, bills that have support to pass might just die due to lack of funding. So there have been some politically motivated delays over the last few days of session, and I was really sweating it because remember I was a little attached to this bill. Fortunately, media literacy made it through the process. It ultimately passed the House on the very last day of session. In fact, it was the very last bill that passed on the very last day, and it was my first bill that I entered way back in December. And it was signed into law by the governor on May 16th. Why is this all important for you to hear? I say this in nearly every presentation I give, especially to young people. Your voice really matters. Be sure to use your voice and your power, your words are power, in an ethical and educated way. If you do, you can change the conversation and you can change the world. So what can you do specifically? I'm going to leave you with these points. You can understand the role that confirmation bias, stereotyping, and other cognitive biases play in how we interpret events, news, and information. Consider your role as a citizen in democracy and your responsibility as a civic participant and citizen watchdog. Understand the standards of quality journalism that are designed to minimize the influence of individual and group biases, and develop strategies for verifying news and information. I love this quote by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely. The real safeguard of democracy, therefore, is education. Thank you all for having me here and for your attention tonight.